That now. All right, we are recording. We're going to go live. Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome. I know you're so used to seeing Maddie. I'm actually taking over for Maddie today. She's just left for vacation. She is somewhere high in the mountains right now. She'll have to tell you all about her trip when she gets back. So welcome to this week's episode of Hi Mama Helps webinar. Get settled in. We're going to get started in about 4 minutes here. Let us know in the chat where you are coming from. I know it's been a while since I've hosted. Welcome everyone. Good afternoon. Hi from Virginia. Hello, Wisconsin. Get settled in. Thank you so much everyone for joining us today. We're so excited for today's Hi Mama Helps webinar with the lovely folks from Barefoot Books. If you haven't heard of them, Lena will pop their website into the chat. You can check them out. We have a super exciting prize pack from Barefoot Books today as well. I'm so excited about the prize pack. When I heard about what we could win today, someone's going to go home with a very lovely prize pack from Barefoot Books. We're talking all about creating an anti-bias classroom for children through picture books. So as you can imagine, the prize pack has something to do with those picture books there. We'll reveal it very, very soon if you didn't check it out yet. Welcome everyone. Hi from New York, just across the pond. We're here in Toronto. Make sure if you're using the chat function that you switch your chat from panelists to panelists and attendees, just so we can all see all of your amazing ideas, your amazing conversations, and any questions you may have. Hello from South Africa. I visited South Africa. It's my favorite place in the whole world. Hello, thank you so much for joining us in the evening there. We're going to get started in about 2 minutes here. If you do have a question for Barefoot Books, you can use the Q&A function on the bottom part of your Zoom chat. We'll answer the question live. So yeah, if you have a question right now, make sure you get it in. I imagine this is going to be a very jam-packed session, so get your questions in early for our 3 panelists. Hello from New Mexico, New Jersey. A couple folks in Toronto here, welcome. Glad to have our neighbors in Ottawa joining us as well. A lot of folks from Virginia, Charlotte. Hi Lisa from Tennessee. Gonna get started in just about a minute here. Let us know where you're coming from, get settled in, grab some water, maybe your lunch. Might be lunchtime where you are. Thank you so much for spending your lunch hour with us. We really do appreciate it. We have so many amazing resources for today's webinar session as well. So make sure you check the show notes email and our blog after, and we'll also provide them to all of our attendees today and everyone who registered. You're going to get a copy of all the amazing resources that Barefoot Books has to provide, as well as the show notes and of course today's recording. Hello, Carmen from Guam, 4 in the morning, you are dedicated. I'm just going to turn on my closed caption here. So if folks are joining us and need the closed caption, they will be able to have that. So let's turn on the live transcript. There we go. So closed caption should now be available. You can click the CC button at the very bottom of the Zoom, and then you should be able to have the closed caption turned on for you. I know a lot of folks are joining us during nap time, so we want to make sure that you can still learn during nap time. Dedicated ECEs, indeed, Linda, they are. All righty, I'm going to stop my music here. We're going to jump into today's webinar. So as I mentioned, we have a super, super exciting prize pack to be won from Barefoot Books. This is just a glance at something that you could win by attending today's session. It's valued at over $100. I was super, super excited about this prize pack, and I think you will also be excited about this prize pack as well. So it's a preschool diversity and global awareness classroom set. You'll get all these wonderful books delivered right to you, so you can use these amazing resources in your classroom to start the conversation about diversity and really all the conversations about different cultures and different people. Just a note here, you do need to be located in the US, Canada, or the UK, and we will announce the winner in our show notes email. Quick disclaimer before we jump into the meat of the webinar, this content is not personalized for legal or financial advice for your center. The goal here is to have a conversation around the topic to inspire and give you ideas that you can implement into your center. Of course, each state, province, and country has different licensing rules and regulations, so please consult with your own legal and financial advisors before implementing anything into your center that you're not 100% certain about. Before we jump into this, we do want to acknowledge the land that we are currently residing on here in Toronto.
Hi Mama acknowledges that our main headquarters is situated in Toronto, Ontario, on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, and the Haudenosaunee and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. Toronto itself is a word that originates from the Mohawk word takaranto, meaning the place in the water where the trees are standing. As participants and guests in today's webinar, we are coming together from many different places around the world. We encourage you to learn about and acknowledge the land from which you participate.
Next, we're going to jump into our diversity and inclusion statement on behalf of Hi Mama.
Hi Mama is committed to fostering an inclusive and welcoming environment for our employees, customers, and community. Hi Mama welcomes and celebrates individuals of all backgrounds, orientations, and identities. Our Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging Committee aims to ensure we provide a safe environment for everyone to thrive while bringing their authentic selves to work. Our mission is to promote an inclusive workspace for all employees through education, discussion, and celebration of our differences. Embracing these differences while coming together with a common purpose is what makes our team extra special.
Very special indeed. Happy to be part of the Hi Mama family. Before we jump in, just a few housekeeping notes. If it is your first time joining us, welcome. If you need to leave early, just know that, or if you're joining us late, just know that today's session is recorded and we will send it to you shortly via email. And of course, it's always available on our blog after we record. If you do need to use closed caption, just hit the CC button at the bottom of your Zoom screen and you'll be provided with some closed captioning. By attending today, you will receive a certificate of participation. It'll be sent out to everyone who has attended the live session along with these slides. So make sure you check your email early next week and you'll see that in your inbox. And of course, if you're having any trouble on Zoom right now, if you're having any access trouble, please reach out to support.zoom.us, and they are the best people to get in touch with if you're having any trouble over Zoom. Again, it's recorded, so if things are a little bit wonky with your Zoom, we'll send it to you via email. Did you know that Hi Mama makes the #1 rated childcare app? We are not just here for webinars. We actually make the #1 rated childcare app. So we provide parent communication, photo and video sharing, contactless billing and payments, child portfolios, you name it. We cover it all and we are here to help you. If you want to learn more about Hi Mama and potentially become a customer, we would love to show you around. Lena will put a link in the chat right now. If you want to check out Hi Mama, we would love to show you around and we'll show you exactly how we're going to streamline observations in your center. Along with being a customer at Hi Mama and joining the Hi Mama family, you will also probably meet Julie here on the screen. She is one of our phenomenal account managers and maybe she'll onboard you with Hi Mama. We also provide free weekly podcasts, the preschool podcast with our CEO, Ron Spernberg. We have hundreds of articles by industry experts. We're also a certified B Corporation, and we also offer world-class customer support. Who are we? You probably haven't seen me for a long time. Maybe it's been about a year, or if it's your first time here, welcome. My name is Kaya Price. I am the social media specialist. In a former life, I was an early childhood educator, and I will be your host for today's webinar. We also have the lovely Lena joining us. She is our marketing coordinator. Lena, welcome. So good to see you on here as well. If you have any questions or need any support, Lena is your go-to person. Lena, do you have any fun facts or anything exciting that's happening that you want to share?
Hey everyone, I'm Lena, as Kaya mentioned. My fun fact for this weekend, I'm actually going to my local bookstore, kind of, I guess, on brand for this webinar. So I'm excited to go look up books this weekend, actually.
Very on brand. Going to a bookstore, like a really cute little bookstore, is one of my favorite things to do. So hopefully Lena can find something interesting there. Tell us in the chat, what is your favorite book that you're reading right now? We would love to know. Let's get some new ideas flowing. All right, it's time to welcome our special guests from Barefoot Books. We have Dr. Paula, we have Autumn, and we have Stefanie joining us from Barefoot Books. Hello to you all. Join us on camera. Welcome, welcome. So excited to have you three here. Let's kick it off with some more fun facts. I kind of prepared you before. Any fun facts that you three would like to share with us? Paula, you're at the top of my screen here. Anything you want to share?
All right, fun fact, in a former life, I was a classical pianist.
Interesting. What was something that you liked to play?
Oh, Brahms and Chopin are definitely my favorite.
Chopin, very, very nice. Autumn, welcome. Fun fact for yourself?
Sure. Fun fact, my favorite neighbors, don't tell the neighbors next door, are the cows across the street.
Do you look out at a farm? Like how many cows are we talking? Just
I'd say about 18 max.
wow. So you've definitely counted cows at one point, maybe during COVID.
The babies are the cutest.
Oh, I bet. I love that. That's awesome. And Stefanie, welcome to you. Do you have a fun fact you'd like to share with our audience today?
Hi, sure. Even though I've been a mom to a human for a few years, the screensaver on my phone is still my dog who died a few years ago.
That's precious.
Don't tell my kid.
Dogs are always a first love. What kind of dog was it?
Oh, well, I happen to have a picture. A miniature schnauzer.
Oh, so cute.
Her name was Maisie after the book.
Oh, love it. Like Maisie Mouse, right?
Yep.
That's a good book. Amazing. Well, welcome to you three. We are so excited to have you on. Let's jump into this. I will go off camera, let you three take control here, and we'll take it away.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Pleasure to be here. So I'll start off. My name is Paula Jackson, and I describe myself first and foremost as a global citizen because I've lived in over 10 countries. I'm also a passionate educator. I completed my graduate degrees at University of Oxford and Cambridge and my doctoral degree in London. I've spent the past 16 years teaching and working as a researcher and advisor to schools and governmental agencies in the UK and Europe. And I'm going to hand this on to Autumn. You can do your introduction now.
Okay, hello everyone. Thanks for being with us today. My background is in education also. I have worked outside of traditional school settings for about 15 years, mostly with literature, history, and writing, doing workshops and literature circles and things like that. So I really sit with children at different ages and see their reactions to the books that we're making. And that's what really sort of drives me in the creation of the books that we're making at Barefoot Books. I'm currently a senior editor at Barefoot Books, and I also write books for children, and I continue to work in the education space as well.
Okay, thanks, Autumn. Hi, my name is Stefanie Paige Wieder. I'm the Director of Education and Content at Barefoot Books. I've been there for over 8 years, but before that, I was an early childhood teacher and director for many years before going on to develop programs and products and content for children and families. So I'm really honored that all of you are here to be with us today.
Thank you, Stefanie. So at the moment, I'm at Barefoot Books as their Director of Global Citizenship, where we focus on opening the hearts, minds, and worlds of children. And that is my why. And speaking of whys, I'd like you all to take one moment. Can I get the next slide, please? And the next one, right. I'd like you just to take a few moments to think about your why. I'd like you to think about why you're doing what you're doing. And you could just sort of put your response in the chats as we go. What's your vision for the children that you're educating? I'll give you about 45 seconds to put your responses in the chat. Well, as we wait, I'll just share with you that I did a panel a few weeks ago. And what I found wonderful was that the responses all sort of, strongly resonated with giving children a sense of belonging to the world, showing them how connected we are, unity, love, respect. Oh, here we go. Love seeing them grow, to help children to become the best that they can be. Exactly. To make a difference by nurturing all of the children. Authenticity, wonderful. Thank you very, very much. Keep them coming. So the point I'd like to make is that I argue that books have immense potential in serving these visions that you all are expressing. They have the power to create destinies, to cultivate compassion, as many of you have just addressed, and they inspire readers to dream of empowering futures. Books can nourish the mind and the heart. So I'd like to chat a bit about what this means and how this looks in the context of early childhood education. Next slide, please. Thank you. Books, identity, and representation. Children's picture books are one of the earliest forms of media that introduce children to the world. And the research out there confirms that the messages that kids glean from these books will impact their beliefs, their aspirations, their academic achievements, and it will inform their identity. And when does this begin? Identity formation really begins the moment a child is born. And from that time, they're exploring the world around them, and they're learning from the people they see and hear. When we read a story to our children, we're actually taking them on a journey. And that journey will impact the way that they see themselves and others in the world. When we're reading a story to our children, we're showing them where they belong, where they can go, and who they could become. At the same time, however, when we read a story, we could equally be showing them where they do not belong, where they cannot go, and who they cannot become. Next slide, please. What are the messages that we're sending in the books that we read to our children? Next slide, please. Bias. I'm going to share a bit about the concept of bias, just what it is, when it seems to develop in individuals, and just how it relates to books. By the time an infant is just 3 months, they can distinguish among faces of all races equally well. They have what I call sort of a universal outlook in embracing the world. Neuroscientific research conducted by Professor Lee at the University of Toronto and others in the US, UK, France, and China all confirm that by the time an infant has reached the 6-month mark, they show a preference towards individuals that match the race of their primary caregivers. This is much in alignment with a study that was conducted in Israel in the early 1980s. They were showed that Black Ethiopian infants who moved to predominantly white communities in Israel and cared for by primarily white caregivers, they showed no preference for either Black or white individuals. These studies indicate that infants' face preferences are shaped primarily by their experience and exposure. Next slide, please. By the age of 3 and 4, the preference and exposure that the infants have had become more solidified, and they begin to shape their visual perception of others and themselves. Research confirms that by the time a child is just 3 years old, they are already expressing a strong racial and gender bias. Now, these biases are much influenced by the biases that surround them. The research by Skinner, Meltzoff, and Olson in just 2017 confirms that our language, and our nonverbal expressions are powerful sources of bias. So when children see or experience expressions of social bias amongst us adults, they take it on as their own. These expressions happen all the time, every single day through our natural discourse, when we talk about people. It happens when we describe a person on the basis of their color or ethnicity or gender or ability. It also occurs when we react negatively to certain people or situations. It really sends messages to children that become built into their bias repertoire, so to speak. It's important to note that the categories that we construct, whether they're racial or ethnic or gender or ability related, all of these biases that we hold, they're not at all innate, nor are they universal. They are all social constructions, ones that we acquire from the outside in. Next slide, please. And I love this quote by Professor Sandra Waxman. Biases are not something that needs to be taught. They're caught. And they're caught in the books that they read, through the characters that children see or do not see. Children's materials that positively portray the diversity of our cultures and backgrounds have a profound influence on their identification with their world and their ability to act within. The absence of a child's background from the books that we read to them sends the message to them that they do not matter, that they're invalid. And this exclusion, even if it's not intended, is a form of bias. This is highly damaging to a child's sense of self. It impacts their cognitive development and their social emotional learning. Next slide, please. Mirrors, windows, and sliding doors. Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop published a wonderful essay in 1990 about the importance of exposing young children to diverse literature. The essay is entitled Windows, Mirrors, and Sliding Glass Doors. Now, the metaphor of the mirror describes the books that reflect readers' experiences. And when children see themselves reflected back in the books that they read or hear, they feel a sense of connection and belonging. While affirmative, it's also restrictive in that the reader can only see their own reflection and nothing beyond that. And this is why windows become very important. When books serve as windows, readers get a chance to glimpse the outside. They can visit people and look at other experiences that are removed from their own. Windows offer readers a chance to see their world from a different perspective. It widens their horizon, and most importantly, it enables the development of empathy and compassion. These windows could also become sliding glass doors through which readers can enter into a world that has been created by an author. Readers can see the world from another perspective, but also be changed by the experience. Next slide, please. When books don't serve as mirrors to children, they start to believe that they're devalued in society. Now, I'm going to share a rather personal story about my 3-year-old daughter a few years ago. And she had just returned home from daycare and was in a clearly horrible mood. She stomped over actually to the mirror, and she just gazed at herself. And I waited for her to smile or to make funny gestures as she normally would do. But on this day, she didn't. She literally spat at her reflection in the mirror, and she pulled at her curly hair. And I could tell you as a parent, I was absolutely horrified. It turns out that earlier that day, she wanted to play princess with her friends after her teacher had read a book that featured princesses. But her 3-year-old peers told her that she couldn't join in the game because of how she looked. You see, none of the princesses in the book looked anything like my daughter. Her peers had taken on the message that she, therefore, could not be one. I went into the daycare to talk to the educators about my daughter's very disturbing behavior, and I wanted to see if we can figure out something to do. I discovered that none of the books that her educators were reading to the class presented characters that looked anything like my daughter, sending all sorts of unintended messages. One of the educators told me that she didn't want to treat my daughter any differently or to make an issue of her different skin color because it may cause her to feel alienated. So she just ignored it. I get it, and she was well-intentioned. However, next slide, please. What the teacher actually exhibited is what we refer to as color blindness. And when someone is colorblind, they are unable to distinguish certain colors. And in this case, the educator was blind to the everyday realities of my child, to her needs, and to the way in which she was perceived by her peers. Being colorblind means teaching to the default. It ignores how a child perceives the world and how that child is perceived by others. It sadly affirms and reinforces the stereotype that exists outside of the classrooms. Now, this particular daycare was full of mirrors, reflecting back the dominant culture. The windows were all closed and didn't allow for the children to see the world beyond their own reflection. And because of that, the 3-year-old children in the daycare exhibited what we refer to in the research as implicit bias. Next slide, please. Implicit biases are the attitudes or stereotypes that affect our understanding, actions, and decisions in an unconscious manner. So they're not intended, and we all have them somewhere along the line. Next slide, please. It's just our way of sort of gathering information and judging people accordingly. And I have a few examples here. When we talk about groups of people, Americans are, fill in the blank, Italians are, all girls are, and no one like you could become a princess. Next slide, please. This brings us to intent versus impact. The educator had the best of intentions, but the outcome or unintended impact that it had on my child and the other children in the daycare resulted in the exact opposite of what she had tried to achieve. So over the course of the next couple of weeks, the other educator told me that she had purchased a number of dolls for the classroom, dolls that reflected various shades of skin tones and hair textures. She also brought in books that portrayed children protagonists from various backgrounds, doing funny things, everyday things, and heroic things. And my heart did a flip when I returned to the daycare and I saw my daughter playing with her friends, seeing them all playing with the dolls. I looked towards the bookshelves and I noticed that some of the books were filled with characters that reflected a world beyond the mirror. This seemingly small act, the opening of a window, changed the entire dynamic of the classroom. My daughter felt affirmed and was accepted by her classmates. Next slide, please. By offering books as windows, it gives children the chance to experience another reality, seeing and experiencing a prince or a princess, a great character that just happens to be other-abled or brown-skinned or wears clothes that are different from what you may wear. It can serve to dismantle emerging stereotypes. And better yet, it offers possibilities. And this promise of possibility is what gives me hope. So it's imperative for us to understand who our readers are and to consider who our children will meet in the stories that we read to them. Because at the end of the day, it's not the test scores that's the greatest predictor of their lifelong success, but it's their relationships. It's their relationships to themselves and to those around them. In the US at the moment, there are over 26 million children under the age of 5. Their future is in great part in your hands. We need to ensure that our children have access to books that serve as both mirrors and windows. Let's not keep them locked up and closed in. Next slide, please. So I'm going to close my part with 2 questions for you to ponder. What stories are you telling? And are you living out your why? And now I will hand over the rest of the presentation to my amazing colleagues, Stefanie and Autumn.
Thank you so much. I always love hearing that sort of travel through the development of bias and then how we as adults and caretakers can really sort of step in and intervene. And so we're going to go a little deeper now into using books to intervene. So we'll go into the next section of the slide deck on children's books and bias. And we want to show you a table, a sort of animated graphic that shows the numbers of books by race that have been published and made available in the US. And these numbers are for 2018, but they're not changing much year by year. Although we do see, publishers paying more attention to these numbers. This is sort of a representative sample. So what we see in this graphic is taking the numbers and sort of making it visual, as Dr. Jackson was talking about the windows, mirrors, and sliding glass doors. So you see that on the left, 1% of books have been published about American Indians or First Nations. And so you see this child with a tiny little mirror in their hand, just sort of not fully reflected at all. So the picture that this child is getting when they read books is that they're barely there, right? And then next to that, you have 5% of books published about Latinx children or Latinx characters. And so you have this girl looking in the mirror that's sort of like a hand mirror. It's like, okay, you can pretty much see your face, but it's definitely not a full picture. You can't see, different aspects of yourself and yourself in different ways. Next to that, you have 7% of books published about Asian Pacific Islander, Asian Pacific American characters. And so you've got a mirror that's sort of like a small wall mirror. It's like maybe adequate, and it's gradually increasing. For the African American characters, you have 10% of books. And so it's there, but then next to that, you have animals who feel like, yay, I'm pretty much well represented. They've got 27% of children's books featuring them. Okay, so all of the children of color are seeing themselves in books less than animals. And so this is, a pretty stark commentary on the sort of emphasis of what we're prioritizing overall as a society to show children about who matters. Okay, and then all the way on the right, you have 50% of books for children being published about white children. And so what you see in that graphic is this child has an entire room dedicated to him. He's got the long mirror for contemporary stories with a puppy. He's got a mirror in the back for another view of himself. He's got himself as a superhero. He's got himself as an astronaut, as a king. And then in the ceiling, you see, more reflections, just all these different reflections. A firefighter and a musician, you've got all these different ideas about who he can be. So as Dr. Jackson was saying, the books that we use and the things that children see in those books about who can be what, who can do what, really comes down to showing children what the world likes in terms of what the world looks like in terms of who they can be, and also in terms of who others can and can't be. So the presence and absence of different kinds of people throughout the spread of children's books is really crucial to think about. And it's one of those things that, as my husband, who's a specialist in education and race, says, racism is so strong that if you leave it alone, it'll just perpetuate itself. You don't have to do anything in order to make racism continue. All you have to do is sit there. So if you just go to the library and you just say, oh, this book looks good, this looks good, this looks good, and you just come with a pile of books that just looked good, you may end up with 50% about white children and, these types of numbers. Whereas if you go into the library aware that, okay, I'm going to be faced with mostly books about white children. So let me intentionally pick out and seek out books that are more diverse, books that will show the children that, the world is bigger than that, then you are doing the work to go up against the system that keeps repeating itself. And of course, race is just one of the aspects of diversity, but it's one that, is very visual and that is easy to reference. And, it goes for disabilities and, all other sorts of differences as well. So that's just, one way to really dig deep into the numbers, because we can see a table and see numbers and think, oh, yeah, I guess, that's not really fair. But, when you look at the faces of these children in this infographic and really try to remember what it feels like to see only 1% of books about you, and then what this white child is going to think, seeing so much of himself reflected back and hardly anything of, a Native American child reflected back. So it's just something for us all to really think about and keep in mind as we're acquiring books for our libraries. Go on to Steph.
Thank you, Autumn. And as you're saying that, it is reminding me of something that's been happening in our household with my daughter. Is I've noticed that my husband constantly uses the pronoun he as a default when talking about the stuffed animals of my child, when talking about a character in a book. And I'm like, well, how do you know it's a he? Our child is a she. Why would you default to he all the time? So we and the people around us do things like this constantly. But if you could go to the next slide, please. Now that you've gotten a sense of the children's book publishing landscape, we're going to offer you practical tools for finding and bridging anti-bias gaps in your own literacy practice. And so we're going to give you practical suggestions for auditing your books, auditing your conversations and your activities around your books, and auditing yourself for your own biases. And I actually saw a comment in the chat about someone mentioning the importance of auditing yourself, which is great. Next slide, please. So Dr. Jackson talked about how children have bias, but really we all have bias. Of all the things we're going to talk about auditing today, auditing ourselves is by far the hardest. Every single person in the world has bias, even those of us who really don't want to. It takes a lifetime of work to start to uncover our hidden biases. And people in minority groups have biases too. Everybody has bias because it's natural. It's natural for us to perceive the world from our own point of view. It's natural, as Dr. Jackson said, for children to categorize and try to make sense of the world. But the essential place to start, if you're dedicated to ensuring an equitable education for all your students, is to accept that you have bias, and that one of the most important things you need to do is to be open to discovering what those biases are. So next slide, please. One place to start is to take an implicit bias questionnaire online. And if you haven't heard about this, there are many out there. Project Implicit, which you can find online with a Google search, allows you to select questionnaires from a range of topics. You can choose from specific racial groups, sexual orientation, disabilities, body size. So these questionnaires can help you understand where you might have some areas of bias to consider, and the results might surprise you. I was very surprised. The other thing to do is just to start to become curious about your own thoughts and behaviors. Notice areas in your teaching practice where you feel a little uncertain or uncomfortable. Like, for instance, have you had a nagging feeling that maybe you don't know which languages one of your students speaks at home, or you're not entirely sure how to pronounce one of your students' mother's names, so you avoid saying it? So here's an example of how implicit bias has shown up in my life. I have a now 3-year-old daughter, and I take her to a lot of public playgrounds in the city where we live. And I like to strike up conversations with everyone who seems open to it because I'm trying to make friends in the area. But I noticed a couple of months ago that all of the people I've actually exchanged contact information with are fluent English-speaking white women. So I've taken the first step of noticing my bias. I'm talking to everyone, but I'm only really developing relationships with people who are like me. So my next step is to ask myself, what are my assumptions about the people I'm not exchanging information with? And what kind of relationships might I be missing out on? And so our next suggestion is to try to notice your assumptions. If you have a doubt about something from a culture that's not your own, listen to that doubt, because it's a chance to check your assumptions and learn. So let's say you want to introduce your students to holidays from lots of cultures, but you're not exactly sure how to do it, it's super important to do the research, because providing incorrect information is damaging too. I recently got a newsletter from a local preschool, a sample newsletter saying that over the winter holiday, the kids tried matzah for Hanukkah. Matzah is just not a Hanukkah food. So it would have been good if they had looked into that. As Dr. Jackson described earlier, these assumptions that we're not even aware of, they can affect how we plan our lessons and interact with our students. And unfortunately, they will add to existing bias that these children and families have experienced outside of the school setting. So I urge all of us to reflect on ourselves, accept what we find, and just greet it with curiosity, and then decide what we want to do about it. Next slide, please.
Great. So next, we want to talk about identifying gaps in our libraries. You want to audit your books. So you want to do, whenever you're using a title that is sort of like, everybody knows this title, I grew up with this title, you know, it's common. Just do a quick search to make sure that nothing has been written about it, identifying harms that it has done for people who are not like yourself. Or, you know, even if you are, say, Black and you're reading Little Black Sambo, do a search just to be sure, because a lot of books written in prior generations have not aged well. And it's important to find out what kind of impact they've had on people who have had to read them when they were children. So these are just two examples, Little Black Sambo and the Five Chinese Brothers, of books that have been written about more recently that, you know, children had to read in classes, and that just really were not, they were considered by the teacher to be accurate mirrors, but were not experienced that way by children. So when you're looking into the classics, you want to sort of question any feelings you have about old titles. If you're feeling defensive, like, well, I grew up with this book and my mom gave it to me, and, you know, if you have an emotional attachment, just sort of question that, you know, and does it mean, just because it didn't affect you negatively as far as you're aware, does it mean it's not going to affect others negatively? You want to prioritize the feelings of the people who are from that background. So I'm not Chinese. So if someone says that the Five Chinese Brothers is harmful and they're Chinese, I need to defer to them, right? And so, you know, basically at the end of the day, as you all know, because you're caretakers and educators, what matters is how your students will feel and the ideas that they're going to take away. You, of course, want to scan anything you're going to use with children for offensive or dated language and images. And just remember that if one child feels alienated because of poor representation, that is one child too many. On the next slide, we have a couple of more tips. You want to evaluate the overall message of the book. So for example, these are some Barefoot titles that we really love. If you look at Let's Celebrate, Special Days Around the World, it is written in a way that is sort of like, we all have celebrations that are special to us, and they're all about community and special days. And it really sort of fosters respect for differences, learning about differences in order to appreciate them, and not sort of setting the narrator as, I am an American white person who's Christian and I am learning about other people. You know, it's really just, we all have these different identities and these different special days. So the perspective is very important. Related to that is to pay attention to the power dynamics on the page. So for example, From My Window is about a young Brazilian person who is dark-skinned, and he's at his window and he's looking and just observing at his own community. And so it's important to note that it's not about, you know, still centering a white child who is having friends who are of different ethnicities and backgrounds and sort of, you know, still being at the center. You want to look at who's at the center, who is looking, who is doing, who is acting. Okay, so that's all about power dynamics on the page. You want to look for a balance of windows, mirrors, and sliding glass doors. So look at your classroom and make sure that all the children in your classroom can see themselves in the books that you're bringing in, as well as seeing people of other backgrounds in those books. And we just want to more deliberately reflect the world that we actually live in. And as publishers on our side, we are trying to work with creators to represent their own backgrounds so that those images are more sort of accurate reflections of the way people live and the way people want to be represented. On the next slide is just a reminder that it's very important to not only represent, special sort of aspects of culture. And I saw in the chat someone was upset that they were dinged for having people represented in their native dress around the world. And that's something I hope we can get into in the Q&A. But, it is important to note that people who are from different backgrounds still want to be represented in normal situations and experiencing joy. And so people, a lot of people of color have sort of struggle in their history, issues with oppression and fighting different power structures, but we don't want to have too much of that overwhelmingly represented, because all kids are kids, and they want to see themselves represented as firemen and magicians and, just having fun. And so the importance of having children who of all types represented in situations that are just sort of regular, everyday, being with friends and building things and making things, balancing that with the cultural content. And these are just a few examples of Barefoot Books that do that really well. On the next slide, we have these are just some names of blogs that do diverse book reviews. So if you're just not sure where to start, other than the Barefoot Books website, of course, you can go to, specific blogs to find books about particular demographics. And so you can look at these, and also in the handout we've provided are some tips for assessing if a book is diverse and inclusive, and a quiz that you can try with your co-teachers in the book area of your classroom, so that you can use specific questions to see if your collection has gaps. Okay.
Thank you.
Over, yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, Lena has just put the link to the handout in the chat. So it's a really concrete tool that you can use with your team for professional development. So, go ahead, download that. We'll ask her to put it in the chat again towards the end so you can make sure to get it. And we're going to try to quickly move through the rest just with an eye on time, but we're now going to talk about auditing your conversations around books. One of the prime benefits of diverse and inclusive books is that they open the door for both spontaneous and planned conversations about similarities, differences, and how children feel about themselves and how they treat others. So we all know how blunt children can be, right? I've gotten a lot of doozies myself, like when the time a student asked me, "Why are your teeth yellow?" And they really weren't that yellow back then. So this can be to our benefit though, because anytime a child in your care asks a question or makes a statement about a person or a group of people, this is a chance to have a spontaneous conversation to uncover their beliefs and provide factual information. It's a teachable moment. Research tells us that as adults, we need to gently correct misconceptions children have about people. Like Autumn's husband mentioned, racism happens if we don't stop it. Bias happens if we don't stop it. So if we don't gently correct their misconceptions by drawing them into conversation, children will naturally make assumptions. And so it's our job to ask questions that reveal their beliefs and then gently provide factually correct information. So next slide, please. One place to start is by asking high-level questions as you're reading books with children. So high-level questions are also called open-ended questions. They're questions that don't have a right or wrong answer and that tend to elicit more than a one-word answer from kids. So for example, rather than asking, "What is this character holding?" try asking something like, "What do you notice about this character?" So if a child starts talking a lot, it's a clue that you've asked a good open-ended question. On this slide are more examples of high-level questions, and in your handout is a discussion guide, which includes additional high-level questions. Next slide, please.
Okay, so real quick, I picked these two books because they represent different protagonists in different settings that in real life, a lot of people would put one above the other. They would say, oh, of course, it's better to live in suburbia than to live in an urban rundown neighborhood, right? And, you know, people might not consciously say it's better to be white than to be Black, but that's the message that pretty much every media in our society sort of throws at us. And so using books to sort of fight back against the real world messages that kids are getting is just one thing that could be really powerful. And so you have Westlandia set in the suburbs where a child is out here, you know, just playing pretend. And then you have I Got Next set in an urban setting where a child is out here with friends, sort of playing basketball on a court in the middle of the inner city. And you can use books that are so different and sort of have children talk about similarities, differences, and this is an opportunity to confirm that, yes, we all are different. And it doesn't mean anyone's better or worse, right? And so books are really an opportunity to sort of discuss differences on a value neutral basis. Other things you want to do in those discussions is become aware of your own, the things that you notice and the associations that you make. You want to also offer vocabulary about difference so that children know that, yes, it's okay to say, oh, he's Black. You know, when I was a kid, it was like considered impolite to mention someone's race. And that made me feel like being Black was impolite or was, you know, a bad or taboo. So you want to, you know, talk about things. You want to offer vocabulary about justice and fairness, because those are things that are inextricably tied to difference in almost every society. So next slide for Steph.
Yep. Is this one for me? Yes. Autumn, did you want to speak to this at all, or should we go on to the next one?
Oh, is this me? Sorry.
No, it's okay.
Yes. Oh, so this is just about being honest about your own position. So, you know, we're not exempt, right? It's not that the children all have identities and we don't. Right? We all are situated in this society. You know, I'm a Black Muslim woman, and that comes with, you know, I'm able-bodied, I'm straight. So that comes with different, you know, positions of privilege and oppression, right? And so we want to just acknowledge that, at least for ourselves, as to where we're coming from. If you're a white educator working with all children of color, you want to just be aware that you have a power balance. And so your discussions about difference need to be very sensitive and nuanced, and you want to have some sort of maybe check in with the parents on how it went, you know, because maybe they're not going to tell you the things that they're uncomfortable with. So just being aware of those things, and then be a model of lifelong learning, because, you know, we're all evolving. Nobody's an expert at this ever. And so just show to children that we're learning, we're growing. And if these discussions are new to you, don't be ashamed of that. Just say, I'm not sure, and show that you can learn and look it up.
Great. So I think we have about 2 minutes left, so I'm going to go as quickly as possible, but just wanted to say that you can plan these conversations. So in your monthly or weekly planning, you can plan to read certain books, and you can plan out the high-level questions that you'll ask. So moving on to our last section, we're going to quickly talk about the activities that you do with your diverse and inclusive books. So toddlers and preschoolers are notoriously egocentric because they are literally not yet capable of understanding that there are other points of view. So how do we encourage empathy when children can only think about themselves? And so a good place to start is by helping all children feel good about themselves. So when you're planning activities around your books, one thing that's always a good bet is to have children share about and reflect on their own identities and families, like with the self-portrait activity seen here that a lot of you probably already do. Next slide was going to be a poll question, which I am unfortunately going to skip, and we're going to move on to the next slide. But the question was getting at, how well do you know the backgrounds of the children in your care? Because it's really hard to have conversations and do activities around diverse and inclusive books if you don't have a lot of information about the children in your care. So if you don't already, be sure to send home a questionnaire to families as soon as you have a new student in your class. It should include questions about holidays the child observes, what languages they hear, who they live with, what their family structure looks like, what their family does for fun. This is important because any child who feels excluded or like they matter less because of activities you're doing in your program is one child too many. So every time you think about an activity you're going to do, Father's Day cards, Mother's Day cards, draw your home, think about, does this apply to every single child in the class? And if it doesn't, think of something else to do. The book Beyond the Bake Sale, The Essential Guide to Family School Partnerships, includes a really great questionnaire that you can adapt for your school or program. So next slide. Once you have this information about your families, a great idea is to involve your students' families in your activity planning as much as you can. I think one of you said in the chat, you get your family photos, and that's perfect. You want to have your family share stuff throughout the year. Keep those photos up around the classroom all year long, not just during one unit. Have them send in foods they like to eat, come talk about who lives in their home. Even if they can't come in, they can email the information. And what do you do though if you have a homogeneous student population and there's not going to be a lot of diversity represented? Well, in that case, diverse and inclusive books play an equally important role in your teaching practice, because you don't want them to turn into that white boy in the infographic who's just seeing himself everywhere. So on this slide, you can see the book Children of the World, published by Barefoot Books. And some of the pages from the book show that people have different bodies. There are different types of helper jobs that children can have. So this kind of book is the perfect springboard for activities, whether you have a diverse group or a homogeneous group. So you can imagine all the projects you could do, from full body tracing to setting up your dramatic play area with various helper jobs. So in your handout, and I'm going to ask Lena to put the handout in the chat again, is a set of 4 open-ended activities you can do with children ages 3 and up. And they align closely with the content of this book, but can be used to support just about any diverse and inclusive book you read. So finally, if you want more activities, on last slide, please, that support diverse and inclusive books, you can visit them on the Barefoot Book website's Learning Hub, which Lena will put in the chat. It's barefootbooks.com/educators. So we hope that this has been a useful chance for you to learn about the intersection between children's books and identity formation, and that you've come away with some practical tools for evaluating your own literacy practice. And with that, we'd love to continue with the wrap up and Q&A.
Amazing. Thank you all so much. I know we went a couple minutes over, but I just thought it was such an engaging conversation. Our audience was really engaged too. They had a lot of things to say, a lot of stories, and thank you all for sharing a bit of your personal experience as well. I know that really helps a lot of our audience kind of relate. So thank you so much for that. I'll let you all take a moment here, catch your breath. Like I said, have a quick stretch before we hop into our Q&A. We did get a lot of really amazing questions. So before we jump into our Q&A, I'm just going to run a quick poll here. So I will have our audience just take a quick second. We do want to hear from you all about what is going on in your center and how you are currently planning activities. So you'll see the poll pop up. If you can take a moment just to answer that, that would be greatly appreciated. And we really want to know, how do you plan activities throughout the day through lesson planning? Do you use an app? Do you use an online document? Are you more a pen and paper person? And specifically, like, how do you plan your diversity activities? As mentioned throughout this presentation, this isn't just a one-day thing, a one-week thing whenever the holiday happens. This should be a year-round thing, and planning inclusive and diverse activities really is a year-round thing, and it's a constant thing. So we'll let that run for just a couple moments. I'm going to bring our guests back on. Hopefully you caught your breath there. We do have a couple questions. We've got about 5 minutes left, so I think we can hop into a few questions here. All right, I've got Autumn with me. Great. So a couple questions here from our audience. We'll start off the very first question we received. How can parents and families get on board with providing these diverse books and resources to their children at their at-home library? So if you are an educator, how can we support families who may not have access to these diverse books and topics? How can they get that conversation started?
One suggestion is if you're able, if you have 5-year-olds who can get a library card, it's nice to send books home with kids. And sometimes that's a stressor, as far as making sure that books are returned on time and, fees don't need to be paid. But there are some amazing cities that do not charge late fees for children's books. So check out your local library and see if you can send books home. I know my sister would just check out books on her own library card and send them home with kids. But, parents don't always have time, to bring children to the library, even though that's one of the, greatest resources we have. So the more you can do to get books physically in the hands of children, so that, their caretakers can see what books even exist, because when we were younger, the kind of books that are out today weren't around. So, parents and caregivers may be amazed to see what is out there, and it may pique their interest to look into what they can get into their homes.
Absolutely. Some really great suggestions there. Thank you so much, Autumn. Our next question we had that came in, someone had asked, I work in a center, a childcare center, where I'm one of the 2 POC, people of color, with my classroom and workplace. How do I talk to them about diversity and bringing in more diverse resources and people? I think that's a really large topic there. What would you suggest to that person?
Stefanie, do you want to take that?
Do I want to take it? Sure, I could. I mean, I'm speaking as a white person, so I have not been in your shoes, in your situation. I think it depends on the environment you're in, but one idea could be to request professional development, even share the recording of this. Hey, we attended this, want to take a look? I also have to say, though, I feel that the burden should not be on you. So in casual conversations, if you find that any of your white colleagues are interested in this, I would really encourage you to ask them to bring it up and spearhead it, because too often the onus is on people of color to initiate this. But I would love to hear if Autumn or Paula, you have suggestions as people who may have been in that situation.
Yeah, I think those are great suggestions. It can take a while to see who is sort of really dedicated to diversity, and often it's a matter of how they live their life outside of work, talking the talk versus walking the walk. And so, when you get to know someone enough to see that they actually really value this, that might be a person to talk to. And you can be honest, because it takes an emotional toll on us. Every single time we have to be the one to bring up something, because it's not just professional, it's personal, so just recognize that if you are going to bring it up, get ready, and plan like a night of just, decompressing afterwards. And so, just be ready for that emotional toll. But the more support you can get from allies, the better.
Yeah, I agree entirely with both of you. I think that just having that, holding a space and finding those who are willing to hold that space to have conversations. What works well with me is to very often sort of pose questions and to ask, I noticed a situation here, how would you feel, if the tables were turned, so to speak, and sort of opening up the conversation, enabling them to sort of step into the shoes on the other side. That could be quite powerful. But again, it sort of really depends. You have to sort of gauge the emotional texture of the context with whom you're talking. But very often it's been very effective for me to do that.
Good. Those are great suggestions. Yeah, Stefanie, did you have something to add?
I wanted to point out that when the question was asked, I assumed I would not be the one to answer it, which is a really good example of how we expect people of color to do the work. So
powerful that just ties it all in together. That's amazing. And not putting the work on people of color. That's not where it should be, right? I love that. Amazing suggestions. Thank you all so much. I'm gonna throw in one more question here. I know we're reaching time, but I'm having such a great time, and this is such an important and amazing conversation I'm having. So last one here, we had the person said, my coworker and I are struggling to see eye to eye bringing diverse holidays into our classroom. She thinks because we don't celebrate them, we shouldn't talk about them. How can I help her see that we should all be learning about diverse holidays? Sorry, was a little wordy there. How can we have that conversation with them, or what do you think of this? I don't know if that is the right answer.
I think
Yeah.
Go ahead. You go first.
I was just going to say, I think so many children have the experience of being in school and having Christmas, Easter, Halloween, all of these holidays that they're just assumed to be celebrating. And the activities in the classroom are not just learning activities, they're celebrating, they're doing the things to actually celebrate the holiday. And it doesn't work for every family. And so with this history, I think it is important to create more awareness about the different holidays that are celebrated around the world. And, the fact that the kid next to you might not celebrate Christmas and might celebrate Eid or, something else. So I think that even if you're not an expert in it, you can find videos, you can find just, as long as you're finding accurate, authentic sources. And if there are any families, you don't want to burden them, but you can offer the opportunity. I know a lot of parents have been so grateful to be offered the opportunity to come into their child's classroom and talk about their holidays. So I definitely encourage it.
Amazing. Love it. Unfortunately, we are reaching time, and we had quite a number of questions come in. So if we didn't get a chance to answer your question, I do apologize. We've had such an amazing audience today. So if you are looking for more resources or want to ask your question to the amazing people at Barefoot Books, make sure you check out their social media. Make sure you check out their website. They have so many fantastic resources for, whatever you may be struggling with in the classroom or at home or in your own life. If you want to start those conversations, they have so many amazing resources. So highly encourage you to check those out. Thank you so much for joining us today, Autumn, Paula, and Stefanie. It's been an amazing conversation. I could talk for another hour, no problem, with you about this topic. So important. It is so amazing. As I mentioned as well, we have the Barefoot Books prize pack to give away to one lucky winner today too. Of course, they have a whole library to check out as well, with some amazing resources in here just to start. So one person will be going home with this amazing prize pack today to get those conversations started. So we'll be announcing the winner in our show notes. Thank you three so much for joining me today. It was so lovely. And we will definitely be in touch soon to continue this conversation and more.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
What's coming up next week? So we will be here at the same time, same place, new person, new company. We are welcoming back Beth Cannon from Beth Cannon Speaks. She will be discussing strategies to improve how you communicate with your coworkers. I know this is going to be an amazing episode, kind of going from, the conversations we just had today. It seems like some of you folks are really maybe struggling to start some weird conversations, awkward conversations. That shouldn't be weird and awkward. They should just be normal conversations that you're having in opening dialogue. So if you're looking for some strategies on how to talk to your coworkers, or maybe even take this into your other relationships and your friendships, you will not want to miss that webinar. Lena will put the link in our chat right now so you can secure your spot for next week with Beth Cannon. As always, you can connect with us on social media. Check us out on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok. We're on Pinterest as well. We have so many amazing resources we want to share with you. And of course, make sure you are subscribed to the Preschool Podcast. Paula was on there just recently talking about global citizenship as well. We'll put that link in the chat and as well as the show notes. So make sure you check out that episode. From all of us here at Hi Mama, thank you so much for spending your Thursday with us. We are so grateful for you. And thank you again to Barefoot Books for joining us. Amazing conversation, so many amazing resources. And I will see everyone here next Thursday with Beth Cannon. I'm hosting again, so hopefully you're not sick of me yet. Thank you. I'll talk to everyone soon.